return of the dead. Meanwhile, at the beginning of 1916, a psychological club was founded in Zurich through a gift of 360,000 Swiss francs from Edith Rockefeller McCormick. She had come to Zurich to be analyzed by Jung in 1913. The club was initially housed in a sumptuous property on Lowenstrasse. At its inception, it had approximately 60 members, some indication that, having left the psychoanalytic movement, the Zurich school was flourishing. For Jung, the aim of the club was to study the relation of individuals to the group and to provide a naturalistic setting for psychological observation to overcome the limitations of one-to-one analysis, and to provide a venue where patients could learn to adapt to social situations. Emma Jung became the first president. At the same time, a professional body of analysts continued to meet together as the Association of Analytical Psychology. The distinction between these two bodies is outlined in a letter of Jung to his colleague Paul Leger of April 2nd, 1917. We have founded in Zurich a psychological club with circa 60 members, in which namely the human social side of our psychology is taken care of. In addition, we have meetings of about 10 analyses which take place every 14 days, where we attempt to understand all the great novelties which the exploration of the collective unconscious has necessitated. One of the key themes in Layer 2 of Liber Novis was the realization of the need to encounter the dead. Jung had come to see that chaos was not formless, but filled with the dead. Not just your dead, that is, all the images of the shapes you took in the past, which your ongoing life has left behind, but also the thronging dead of human history, the ghostly procession of the past. The task of encountering the dead has had its effects upon one and was best done in private. When the time has come and you open the door to the dead, your horrors will also afflict your brother, for your Continence proclaims the disaster. Hence, withdraw and enter solitude, since no one can give you counsel if you wrestle with the dead. The dead needed to be accepted and they needed salvation. It was necessary to heed their lament and accept them with love, but not to be their blind spokesman. He realized that in satisfying the demands of the dead, I gave up my earlier personal strivings and the world had to take me for a dead man. In the draft, he summed up his understanding of the importance of this undertaking. Not one iota of Christian law is abrogated, but instead we are adding a new one, accepting the lament of the dead. Coming to the right relation to the dead was no easy task. Returning to his confrontation with his soul in the winter of 1915, Jung tried to establish this right relation. On December 26, his soul informed him that community with the dead is what both you and the dead need. In a critical entry of January 16, 1916, his soul presented an elaborate theogenic cosmogony. She describes her own nature, the nature of the Daimons, the Heavenly Mother, and the gods. Of particular significance was Abraxas, the powerful and fearful self-renewing god of the cosmos. She characterized the nature of man as striving for absolute individuality, through which he concentrated and countered the dissolution of the pleroma, or the all. Jung drew a schematic dogma of the system. At some point, Later, he proceeded to paint it and titled the work Systema Mundi Totius, System of All the Worlds. On the back of it, he wrote in English, "This is the first Mandela I constructed in the year 1916, wholly unconscious of what it meant." At the beginning of 1916, Jung experienced a striking series of parapsychological events in his house. In 1923, he narrated the events to Carrie D'Angelo, later Daimons. She recorded it as follows. "One night, your boy began to rave in his sleep and throw himself about, saying he couldn't wake up. Finally, your wife had to call you to get him quiet, and this you could only do by cold cloths on him. Finally, he settled down and went on sleeping. Next morning, he woke up remembering nothing, but seemed utterly exhausted. So you told him not to go to school. He didn't ask why, but seemed to take it for granted. But quite unexpectedly, he asked for paper and coloring pencils and set to work to make the following picture. A man was angling for fishes with hook and line in the middle of the picture. On the left was the devil saying something to the man, and your son wrote down what he said. It was that he had come for the fisherman because he was cashing his fishes. On the right was an angel who said, 'No, you can't take this man. He is taking only bad fishes and none of the good ones.' Then after your son had made that picture, he was quite content. The same night, 2 of your daughters thought that they had seen spooks in their room. The next day you wrote out the sermons of the dead, and you knew after that nothing more would disturb your family, and nothing did. Of course, I knew you were the fisherman in your son's picture, and you told me so, but the boy didn't know it." In Memories, Jung recounted that at around 5 in the afternoon, the front door bell began ringing, and the maids were in the kitchen. The front door could be seen from the kitchen. Everybody immediately looked to see who was there, but there was no one in sight. I was sitting near the doorbell, and not only heard it, but saw it moving. We all simply stared at one another. The atmosphere was thick, believe me. Then I knew something had to happen. The whole house was as if there was a crowd present, crammed full of spirits. They were packed deep right up to the door, and the air was so thick it was scarcely possible to breathe. As for myself, I was all aquiver with the question, for God's sake, what in the world is this? They then cried out in chorus, "We've come back from Jerusalem, where we found not what we saw." That is the beginning of the Septum Sermons. Then it began to flow out of me, and in the course of 3 evenings the thing was written. As soon as I took up the pen, the whole ghastly assemblage evaporated. The room quieted and the atmosphere cleared. The haunting was over. The dead had appeared in a fantasy on January 17th of 1914 and said that they were about to go to Jerusalem to pray at the holiest Sepulchre. Their trip had evidently not been successful. They returned and posed metaphysical questions. Jung's response was to address the questions of the dead and instruct them through elaborating to them the cosmogony that his soul had described to him. This took place between December 30th of 1916 and January 8th of 1917. The Septum Sermons ad mortuus, 7 sermons of the dead, to the dead, can be regarded as a culmination for the fantasies of this period. It is a psychological cosmogony cast in the form of a Gnostic creation myth. In Jung's fantasies, a new god had been born in his soul, the god who is the son of the frogs, Abraxas. Jung understood this symbolically. He saw this figure as representing the uniting of the Christian God with Satan, and hence as depicting a transformation of the Western God image. It was in 1952, in answer to Jung, that Jung elaborated on this theme. He had studied the literature of Gnosticism in the course of his preparation reading for a transformation of symbols of the libido. In early 1913, he read Dietrich's Abraxas, still from the perspective of his libido theory. In January and October 1915, while doing military service, he studied the works of the Gnostics intensively. He was struck by the closeness of these texts and his own Liber Novis, and also with what he saw as a similarity between the modern epochs of the time and of early Christianity. After writing the Book of the Dead and the Black Books, Jung recopied it in a calligraph script into a separate book, slightly rearranging the sequence. He added the following inscriptions under the title, The Seven Instructions of the Dead, written by Basilides in Alexandria, the city where the east touches the west. He then had this privately printed, adding to the inscription translated from the Greek original into German. This legend indicates the stylistic effect on Jung of the late 19th century classical scholarship. He recalled that he wrote it on an occasion of the founding of the Psychological Club and regarded it as a gift to the Edith Rockefeller McCormick for founding the club. He also gave copies to friends and confidants. He inscribed a copy to Adolf Keller. This little book that I entrust to your well-meaning and friendly forbearance brings a wish with it. It would like to have a good cover in this cold world weather. The non-author and copyist, presenting a copy to Alfonso Mater, he wrote, I cannot presume to put my name to it, but chose instead the name of one of those great minds of the early Christian eras which Christianity obliterated. It fell quite unexpectedly into my lap like a ripe fruit at a time of great stress, and has kindled a light of hope and comfort for me in my bad hours.